There's a particular kind of silence that settles over a building when leadership changes. It isn't loud, it's cautious, like the walls are waiting to see what happens next. That Friday morning, the hallways of Elridge and Company were unusually quiet. Not in the comforting way. No, this was the kind of silence that made people walk faster, speak softer, and glance twice over their shoulder. I had worked there for 9 years, long enough to understand what silence like that usually meant. The CEO, Richard Elridge, was taking a medical leave after an unexpected surgery. Temporary. That's what the memo said. A brief pause for recovery. It sounded reassuring, but anyone who had worked in corporate long enough knew that temporary could become permanent the moment the board smelled a new direction. And the new direction had a name. Chase Elridge. Richard's son. He was 31, tall, tan, and always dressed like he was attending a startup pitch event. No tie. Slim fit suits. Perfect hair. He'd interned with the company for one summer 6 years ago and apparently believed that was enough to run it. The board agreed. Or at least pretended to. Nepotism had its own kind of gravity. Chase was announced as interim director, but the word interim faded quickly from everyone's vocabulary. He walked in like he'd already won. And technically, he had. I watched from my small glass-walled office near the Translation and International Relations Department. Not a flashy space, but quiet, private, and with just enough of a view of the main lobby to observe everything without being seen. That suited me. My work was built on quiet observation, listening, absorbing, decoding not just words, but intention. I speak 7 languages. Not just conversational phrases, but fluency. Business-level understanding, cultural nuance, regional etiquette. I'd worked with clients from Tokyo to São Paulo, mediated fragile contract disputes in Mandarin, negotiated logistics delays in Russian, and even once handled an emergency protocol misunderstanding with a French customs official that could have delayed a $12 million shipment. But Chase didn't know that. He didn't ask. He didn't even glance in my direction the first time we crossed paths in the hallway. He looked through me, past me, like I was a placeholder in his perfectly curated vision board of company transformation. He greeted loud sales guys by name, gave nods to marketing leads. But when he passed the quiet departments, the ones doing the actual heavy lifting, he barely blinked. I wasn't offended. I was amused. That afternoon, a small group of us gathered in the staff lounge for coffee. The kind of people who had been there before corporate transformation was trendy. Veterans, survivors. One of the senior analysts, Mark, leaned in and whispered, "He's already scheduling department reviews. Fast ones. I heard he wants to cut international consulting overhead." I stirred my coffee slowly. Let me guess. He thinks Google Translate can handle our client briefings? Mark chuckled, but it wasn't a warm sound. Probably. I didn't say more. There was no point in arguing with decisions not yet made. I'd seen young executives come and go, all convinced they were the first to discover efficiency. But this time, something felt different. Not because Chase was sharper, he wasn't, but because he was confident in ways only the profoundly unaware could be. Later that day, as I finalized a briefing packet in Mandarin and Portuguese for a Monday client presentation, my inbox pinged. Subject line, Department Realignment Review, URGENT, from Chase's assistant. Time, 4:30 p.m. Odd time, no agenda. I walked in 10 minutes early, just in case. Chase was already seated at the long table, flipping through a file I recognized as the quarterly performance reviews. My review sat on top, printed in black and white. "Natalie, right?" he said without looking up. "Yes. Appreciate you coming. We're simplifying things around here. Streamlining." He said streamlining like it was a magic spell, as if it would make inefficiency evaporate on command. "Your department is a bit specialized," he continued, "and expensive. We've decided to outsource language needs to an international firm in Singapore. It'll cut costs and consolidate operations." I stared at him for a moment, studying the careless way he said it. No malice, just assumption, as if I was an outdated tool. Effective immediately? I asked calmly. He nodded. You'll be off payroll by Sunday. HR will send your severance details. Of course, we appreciate your time here. I smiled. Not bitter, just quiet. Then I slid my laptop across the table. Well, I said, standing. Good luck with your meeting on Monday. He blinked, confused. Which meeting? You'll find out. And with that, I left the room. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I didn't say another word. But as I walked down that hallway, I felt the shift begin. Because some storms don't need thunder to announce themselves. They just need silence. By the time I reached the parking garage, the sun had begun to dip behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the pavement. I stood next to my car for a moment, keys in hand, and just listened. The world above buzzed with the same Friday rush. Honking cars, phones ringing, people hurrying to be anywhere else. But down here, it was quiet. The kind of quiet that follows after something you've built has been broken. Not destroyed. Not yet. But cracked. Right down the center. I sat in the driver's seat and opened my laptop one final time before surrendering it to sleep mode. On the screen was the meeting brief I had prepared over the past 2 weeks. Mandarin, Portuguese, Arabic. Detailed points of cultural protocol. Travel preferences for visiting delegates. A list of nuanced honorifics to use when addressing the CEO from Beijing. All of it, now meaningless in the eyes of a man who thought outsourcing was the same as understanding. I closed the laptop and exhaled slowly. Let him walk into that meeting blind. The weekend passed in a strange, suspended stillness. I didn't tell many people what had happened. A few texts trickled in from colleagues, ones who had heard the news, ones too cautious to say anything. I understood. Offices like ours weren't safe places to show loyalty? Not anymore. I went for long walks, cleaned the apartment, reorganized a kitchen drawer that hadn't been touched in months. But my mind always wandered back to the same thought. He has no idea what he's done. Chase hadn't just fired an employee. He had dismantled a bridge, one carefully built over years of quiet, patient work. Relationships don't exist in spreadsheets. They live in pauses between translations, in respectful eye contact, in unspoken rituals that only matter if you've taken the time to learn why they matter. But Chase didn't deal in depth, only in optics. Sunday evening, I prepared a small folder. Not a retaliation plan. Not yet. Just documentation. Notes, screenshots, copies of emails. A short, neatly labeled USB tucked into a padded envelope. I didn't know exactly what I would do with it yet. Only that it was wise to be prepared when people in power began to stumble. And Chase would stumble. Of that, I was sure. Monday morning arrived gray and damp, with the kind of rain that makes even the city seem unsure of itself. I dressed simply. Slacks, a dark sweater, no makeup, no need for performance. I wasn't going anywhere. By 9:35 a.m., my phone began to buzz. Unknown number? I let it ring out. Second call, 9:42. Then a third, this time from the office line. I picked up, said nothing. Natalie? Came a voice. A pause. Then more urgently, this is Carla, from Chase's team. Carla was one of the new hires, young, polished, nervous now. Good morning, I said neutrally. There's a bit of an issue with the meeting this morning. The Goldreach group arrived about half an hour ago and asked for you by name. My silence stretched long enough that she filled it with apologies. We weren't aware they expected your presence. Mr. Elridge assumed the new language services vendor? They don't want a vendor, I interrupted calmly. They want someone who understands the conversation they're trying to have. Carla was quiet, then almost whispering. Would you consider coming in? Just to smooth things over? I let the question hang in the air for a full 5 seconds. No, I said finally. I don't smooth things over anymore. And I hung up. From what I later heard, the meeting was a disaster before it even began. Goldreach's VP refused to proceed until I was present. When told I had been let go, he simply stood up and left. No raised voice, no dramatic exit. Just a quiet bow and a sentence Chase didn't understand. When you remove the person who carries the relationship, you remove the relationship itself. No one in the room could explain what that meant. But the moment the delegation walked out, they understood exactly what they had lost. By lunchtime, the office buzzed with whispers. Someone had seen Chase slam a door. Someone else said the CFO looked like he'd seen a ghost. Carla sent one final message to my personal inbox. One line. I think you should know, the CEO is back from medical leave. I read it twice. Then I smiled. Because if there was one person who understood exactly what I did at Elridge and Company, it was Richard Elridge. And something told me that Monday afternoon was going to be a very long one for his son. By the time Chase realized the full extent of the fallout, it was already too late. I heard from a former colleague, Mark, the one who always knew more than he said. He called that evening, his voice hushed and urgent, like he was telling me state secrets. They're panicking, he said. After Goldreach walked out, the CFO demanded an immediate debrief. Chase tried to bluff his way through it, said it was a cultural misunderstanding, that they were too rigid. I leaned back in my chair, watching the steam curl from my tea. And Richard? There was a pause on the line. Then Mark whispered. He walked in during the middle of the meeting. I imagined it clearly. Richard Elridge, graying at the temples, face thinner than before, but eyes sharp as ever. He wasn't loud. He never needed to be. His power came from the way people leaned in when he spoke, because he didn't waste words. He just stood there for a while. Mark continued. Didn't say anything. Then he asked one question. Where's Natalie? I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Mark went on. Chase tried to explain. Something about modernization, cost-cutting, third-party solutions. Richard listened. Then he turned to the CFO and asked for the Goldreach file. After that, he just left the room. Left? Yeah, no blow-up, no big speech, but his face... Mark trailed off. Chase looked like he'd been hit in the stomach. I could almost hear the grin behind his voice. Why are you telling me all this? I asked. Because you should know. The building's shifting, Natalie, and everyone's starting to realize who held it together. After the call, I sat still for a long time. Not out of satisfaction, but reflection. I hadn't orchestrated any of this. I hadn't needed to. Chase had lit the match himself. All I had done was not stop the fire from spreading. The next morning, a sleek black car pulled up in front of my apartment building. I watched from the second-floor window as a driver stepped out, checked his phone, and looked up at my unit. I didn't move. I already knew what the message would say. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. From Richard Elridge. Subject request to meet, private. The email was short, just 2 lines. Natalie, I'm deeply sorry for what occurred. I would appreciate the chance to speak with you. My office, 10 a.m. Please consider it. No pressure, no demand, just respect. I stared at the screen, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to delete the message and move on. But another part, the part still carrying 9 years of loyalty, knew I needed to hear what he had to say. At 9:55, I stepped into the Elridge and Company lobby one last time. It looked the same. Marble floors, tall glass panels, the faint scent of coffee and printer toner. But something was off. People weren't smiling. Conversations were clipped. A receptionist who once greeted me by name now looked up with wide eyes, unsure if I was friend or ghost. The elevator ride was silent. When I stepped into Richard's office, he was already standing. He looked tired, but not weak. A man who'd stared at his company's unraveling and returned before it collapsed. Natalie, he said quietly. Thank you for coming. I nodded. You asked. He gestured to a chair and sat across from me. No desk between us. No titles. I've made a terrible mistake, he said without hesitation. Or rather, I allowed one to be made in my absence. And it cost us a partnership I spent 12 years cultivating. It cost you more than that, I replied. But I imagine you know that now. He nodded once, solemn. Chase didn't understand what you did for us. He still doesn't. But I do. And I'm sorry. Silence settled between us. For once, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was clarifying. I'm not asking you to return, Richard said. I suspect you're already considering better opportunities, and you deserve them. But if you'd be willing, I'd like to hire you as an independent consultant, not under Chase, not under anyone. He reached into a folder and slid a document across the table. It was clean. Director, 6 months, executive-level access, full autonomy, triple my previous salary, no strings, just one sentence in bold at the bottom. This agreement cannot be amended or revoked by any current or future Elridge family member. I almost smiled, but instead, I looked Richard in the eye and said, I'll think about it. He didn't press, just nodded once with the kind of dignity most executives forget the moment power slips from their grasp. As I stood to leave, he said one last thing. You saved this company more times than Chase will ever know. If you choose not to help us again, I'll understand. But either way, I want you to know, he won't be in charge much longer. I walked out with the offer in my hand and something else in my chest. Not triumph, not revenge, something quieter, sharper, control. And I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. I didn't rush to respond to Richard's offer. I knew better than to jump at an apology wrapped in a contract, especially one written in ink but motivated by desperation. Power, when misused, always tries to come back cloaked in humility. But true humility doesn't ask for a favor. It takes responsibility. And Chase? Chase had taken nothing but shortcuts. 3 days passed, long enough for the executive floor to grow increasingly anxious. I could feel the tension without even being there. Messages trickled into my inbox, first from HR, then the CFO, and finally from a name I hadn't seen in years, Marcia Loring, head of global partnerships. Her email was careful, full of soft corporate phrases like collaborative solutions, strategic bridge building, and the ever-reliable moving forward. But beneath the tone, I could hear what she wasn't saying. The cracks were spreading, and they needed me to stop the walls from collapsing. I responded with a single sentence. Have Chase call me directly. I didn't want a boardroom full of apologies. I wanted to see if the boy who fired me could swallow his pride. And he did. 2 hours later, my phone rang. His name lit up on the screen like a headline waiting to fail. I let it ring once, then twice. Then I picked up. Hi, Natalie, he said quickly, voice tight and rehearsed. I just wanted to reach out personally to see if we might clear the air and discuss next steps. I didn't respond. Silence has a gravity some men can't survive. He cleared his throat and pressed on. Obviously, there were misunderstandings earlier. I think we both want what's best for the company, and I believe we'd benefit from your insight as we move forward with our international partners. We, I echoed, just enough frost in the word to make him pause. Of course, your terms would be respected. He added hastily. Full consulting authority. Remote flexibility. Whatever's needed. He didn't mention the firing, the insult, the meeting I prepared that unraveled the moment I left. And that silence told me everything. You know, I said calmly, there's a phrase in Japanese. The nail that sticks out gets hammered down. But in Mandarin, there's another one. Kill the chicken to scare the monkeys. Do you know what they mean? Chase laughed nervously. I don't speak either language. I know, I said. That's why this happened. I let the silence stretch until he started to squirm again. Then I said, I'll consider the offer. but on one condition. Of course, anything. I want full access to the client database, I said. Internal memos, vendor reports, partner comm logs, everything that went through the international channels since I left. He hesitated. That's confidential. Then we're done here. No, wait. He backtracked quickly. You'll have access. I'll send the clearance forms this evening. Good, I said. Let's schedule our first meeting Monday morning. Fantastic, he said, relief creeping into his voice. Welcome back, Natalie. But I didn't say thank you, because I wasn't coming back to help him. I was coming back to see what he broke, and how deeply the damage went. Monday morning, I walked into the building like a shadow returning to claim its space. No announcement was made, no formal introduction, just a badge handed back, a guest pass converted quietly into permanent clearance, and a temporary office, a cold glass cube between legal and procurement. Not an office, a cage with windows. Perfect. I smiled politely, said nothing, and opened my laptop. By noon, I had what I needed, and by 3 o'clock, I knew the full extent of the rot. 2 major accounts had begun ghosting Elridge and Company. One had flagged multiple cultural violations in their last contract draft. Another had already reached out to my former colleague, Raul, now working independently in Brazil, asking if he knew where I'd gone. And then there was the Singapore vendor, the one Chase had hired to replace me. I pulled the report. Sloppy notes, missed deadlines, tone-deaf language suggestions. The Goldreach fiasco wasn't an outlier. It was the beginning. Every client I'd once nurtured now viewed Elridge as unstable, disrespectful, unreliable. And they were right. I compiled a summary, not just a list of failures, but a roadmap of how they could have been avoided. A quiet ledger of loss. Then I scheduled a private meeting. Not with Chase, with Richard. He arrived on time, alone, tired but listening. I have what you need, I told him. But I'm not here to rebuild what your son dismantled. He nodded as if he already knew. I'm here to show him what happens when you mistake fluency for relevance and loyalty for redundancy. Richard didn't interrupt. He just asked, "What do you need?" I smiled then, cold and clean. Just space and your silence. Because revenge, when done right, isn't loud. It's quiet, patient, fluent. And Monday was just the beginning. The trick to dismantling a structure isn't to kick down the walls. It's to find the load-bearing beams, the ones no one notices, and remove them, slowly, carefully. Let gravity do the rest. That's what I did. Each morning, I arrived early, long before the suits filled the halls with artificial energy. I didn't draw attention. I didn't bark orders. I simply worked. Calm, surgical, silent. I reviewed Chase's communications with our international clients. Most were laughable. Form emails, copied and pasted translations, stripped of nuance and warmth. In a deal with a Tokyo-based firm, he had addressed the CEO by his first name in the subject line. Twice. In Portuguese, he had reversed formal and informal tone, effectively calling a senior partner bro. And in one Chinese contract, a vendor clause had been mistranslated to imply the client would cover our penalties for failure. That one nearly cost us a $12 million renewal. It wasn't just linguistic incompetence. It was cultural arrogance. I documented everything. Quietly flagged files, cross-referenced dates, logged complaints that had been buried or ignored. Each note added weight to the case I was building. Not to punish, but to prove. Prove that respect isn't optional. And Chase? He paraded through the building with performative energy. Rushed meetings, loud hallway conversations, LinkedIn posts about modern leadership in a global era. I passed him once in the break room. He gave me a tight, toothless smile. "How are things going?" he asked, like a man trying to make peace with a loaded gun. I smiled gently. Fluent. He didn't get the joke. That afternoon, I called Mr. Kenji Mori, CEO of the Japanese firm we were on the verge of losing. We hadn't spoken in almost a year, not since Richard's final trip before his health declined. Kenji answered on the first ring. "Natalie," he said, warmth evident even through the staticky connection. "You've returned?" "Briefly," I replied. "As a consultant, but I wanted to reach out before decisions are made." He was quiet a moment. Then, "Your company has forgotten our culture. Our expectations. I'm aware. And now they remember. Only because they are afraid." I didn't defend us. I didn't offer hollow apologies. Instead, I said the only thing that mattered. "You were right to be offended." That silence, earned, respectful silence, is more valuable than any PR campaign. Kenji sighed. "We will delay our decision. For 1 week, but we expect more than words." "You'll have them," I said. After the call, I didn't inform Chase. I didn't need to. He hadn't even realized Kenji had stopped responding. Instead, I began restoring what had been broken. I personally rewrote the contract in Japanese, complete with appropriate honorifics, localized phrasing, and embedded etiquette notes. I attached it to a handwritten letter. Yes, an actual letter, sealed with the company's original gold-embossed stationery. A gesture that meant something. And while I did that, the cracks inside Elridge and Company widened. The Brazilian firm canceled an upcoming site visit. The Indian tech partner pulled back funding for a joint research proposal. And one of our senior regional consultants resigned, citing irreconcilable leadership. The board started whispering. By Thursday, Chase looked like a man walking across cracking ice. He paced more, fumbled through presentations, called meetings that went nowhere. He tried to pin the delay with Kenji's firm on communication lag. The CFO didn't believe him. Neither did Marcia. And then came the internal memo. Marked confidential, but forwarded anyway. First to me, then to half the building. Subject line, board discussion interim director performance. That night, I stayed late in the office, sipping cold green tea from a chipped mug I had kept in my drawer since year 3. Chase's voice echoed faintly from the conference room. Fast, defensive, alone. At 9:18 p.m., I received a short text from Richard. "Final meeting, tomorrow, 8:30 a.m., my office." No other details. I sat back, letting the quiet settle around me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It never really had been. This was about truth, about competence, about the cost of underestimating the people who keep the machine running. Not loudly, but fluently, patiently, with care that can't be replicated in an app or outsourced to a stranger halfway across the world. I closed my laptop, stood slowly, and walked through the empty office. Past the glass walls, the blinking screens, the echo of short-sighted ambition. I thought of the first time I walked into this building. Young, focused, hopeful. Tomorrow I would walk in again, but not as the quiet one they forgot to ask for, as the one they'd have to answer to. The next morning, I arrived at Elridge and Company 15 minutes early, not out of nerves, not to prepare. I simply wanted a moment to stand still. The lobby was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows when people are holding their breath. Eyes tracked me as I walked across the marble floor. Some curious, some cautious, a few relieved. No one spoke. No one had to. The air said enough. I took the elevator to the top floor and stepped out into silence. Richard's assistant gave me a respectful nod and gestured toward the glass doors. Inside, the conference room was half full. Richard sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 board members I recognized from shareholder meetings. Marcia was there, so was the CFO. And at the far end of the room, in a chair slightly too large for his posture, sat Chase. He didn't look at me. I took my seat beside Richard without a word. The documents in front of me were already arranged. Neat, intentional. My report, my audit, my proposal. The room settled. Richard began. Thank you all for coming. This meeting is not disciplinary, but strategic. We've gathered to address the performance issues that have affected several of our international partnerships in recent months. No one interrupted. We've also invited Natalie here today, Richard continued, because she is the only person in this room who can explain what actually happened. He turned to me. Natalie? I didn't speak right away. I opened the folder and slid the first document across the table. This, I said, is a timeline of the Elridge International Division over the past 90 days. A second sheet. This is a log of all miscommunications, missed cultural markers, and contract breaches made by our Singapore-based vendor, hired without vetting to replace me. Then a third. This is a breakdown of revenue lost or currently at risk due to partner disengagement. I let the silence stretch between each page. None of these issues existed before I was dismissed, I said simply. Across the table, one of the board members adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. You're saying these losses directly stem from Chase's decision to eliminate your position? I'm not saying that, I replied. The partners are. I opened my final document. These are direct statements from 3 international partners, including Kenji Mori, declaring their willingness to return under one condition. The room waited. I looked directly at Chase. That I stay, and that he steps down. Chase finally looked up. His face had the stiffness of someone trying to hold back emotion, but not knowing which one. He opened his mouth, but Richard raised a hand. No more spin, Chase, he said quietly. We've seen the numbers, heard the silence. But Chase began, then stopped. There was nothing left to say. Richard turned to the board. Effective immediately, I'm reinstating myself as active CEO. Chase will take an indefinite leave from operations, and the interim leadership board will reevaluate the structure of the Global Partnerships Department. The vote was unanimous. I said nothing. I didn't gloat. I didn't even look at Chase again. I gathered my papers. As I stood, Richard said, Natalie, if you're willing to stay, I'd like you to lead the reconstruction of our international strategy team. I paused, then smiled. Not wide, not sharp. Just complete. I'll need a new office, I said. Richard smiled back. Pick one. As I stepped out into the hallway, I passed Chase. He didn't speak, but I did, quietly. You fired me because you didn't understand what I did. You brought me back hoping I'd save what you broke. But I didn't come back for you, Chase. He blinked, still not meeting my eyes. I came back so you'd see the difference between holding power and deserving it. And I walked on. That afternoon, I sat in a sunlit corner office on the 12th floor. The desk was empty. Clean. A fresh start. I opened my laptop, sipped a cup of jasmine tea, and typed my first email of the day. To Kenji Mori, subject, renewal, with respect. As I hit send, I thought about everything that had happened. Not just the loss, the insult, the firing, but the assumption behind it. That experience can be replaced. That loyalty doesn't matter. That relationships are disposable. They were wrong. You can't outsource fluency. You can't automate trust. And if you mistake silence for weakness, don't be surprised when the quiet ones bring the whole system down. With precision, not noise. Some endings don't come with applause. They come with restored balance. And that's more than enough. My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 29 years old, and for the past 3 years, I've been called a lot of things. But the one I'll never forget is whispered at the edge of a party, just loud enough for the laughter to ripple around the room like poison in champagne. She's just a waitress, my mother said. She didn't know I was standing 10 feet behind her, holding the tray of smoked salmon bites she was too busy gossiping to notice. That night changed everything. But to really understand what happened the next morning, when I arrived in a Rolls Royce and the manager said, "Welcome back, boss," you need to know what led up to that moment. I was 25 when I dropped out of my MBA program to take care of my grandmother. She had raised me when my parents were too busy chasing business success and social clout. While they traveled and built their empire, it was Grandma Joan who packed my school lunches, read me bedtime stories, and taught me that kindness wasn't weakness. It was strength. When she got sick, I couldn't just put her in a home like my parents suggested. So I came back to my hometown and took a job at Delaney's, a local upscale restaurant, waiting tables at night and caregiving during the day. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. It also gave me something else: a front row seat to the kind of power games my family thrived on. My mother, Carol Morgan, ran a local PR firm. Think pristine white blouses, sharp heels, and even sharper smiles. My father, Harold, was a partner in a logistics company. My younger sister, Vanessa, had just gotten engaged to the son of one of my father's business associates. That engagement party? It was the social event of the month, and apparently I wasn't invited. Technically. Vanessa had said, "You're welcome to stop by after your shift, Rach." No need to dress up. No need to dress up. That should have been the first clue. But I went anyway. I clocked out at Delaney's at 7:45 p.m., still in uniform, and walked the 3 blocks to my parents' house. I wasn't trying to make a scene. I just wanted to congratulate my sister. I brought her a small gift, a vintage pendant Grandma Joan had once told me she loved as a child. I walked in through the side entrance like I used to when I lived there. The house hadn't changed. Same polished floors, same glimmering chandelier in the foyer. I made my way toward the garden where the party was being held. That's when I heard it. "She's just a waitress," my mother whispered, her voice honeyed with mock concern. I mean, it's tragic, really. So much potential. "And she serves food now." For tips, a chorus of polite laughter followed. "She won't be here long," she added. "She said she might stop by. Let's pray she doesn't bring one of those tragic trays with her." I stood there, rooted to the spot. I hadn't brought a tray, but I might as well have. When I finally stepped outside and walked onto the terrace, a few heads turned. My mother's smile stiffened, like plastic. Vanessa blinked like she didn't recognize me. And my father? He avoided eye contact entirely. I handed Vanessa the small wrapped gift. "Congratulations," I said, my voice even. "Oh," she said awkwardly. "Thanks, you didn't have to. We weren't sure you'd make it." Neither was I. The silence that followed was unbearable. I left after 15 minutes before the first toast. Nobody tried to stop me. That night, I sat alone in my small apartment above the bakery, the pendant box unopened on the kitchen table. My grandmother had passed away 3 months earlier, and I was alone for the first time in my life. But that night, something changed. Not just the shame or the sting of my mother's voice. No, what changed was a decision. I was done being quiet. Done letting them define me. Because what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't just a waitress. I had started a side business during those long nights after my shifts, an anonymous blog about restaurant management and profitability. That blog had gone viral in certain circles. Investors had reached out. Deals had been signed. And 3 weeks before that party, I had officially become the majority shareholder of the company that owned Delaney's. The restaurant I had waited tables in? I owned it now. But I hadn't told anyone yet. That was about to change. The next morning, I showed up at Delaney's in a charcoal pantsuit, heels, and a quiet fire burning behind my eyes. I stepped out of a car I'd had delivered from a luxury rental service. For impact. The Rolls-Royce Phantom purred like a cat in the morning sun. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, the manager, Philip, stepped forward and smiled. "Welcome back, boss." I walked through the front doors of my own restaurant, knowing that by noon, my entire family would know exactly who I was. By 9:15 a.m., word had started to spread. In small whispers, over espresso machines and beneath polished marble countertops, staff who had once worked beside me were now realizing something had changed. That the woman they used to split late-night shifts with was now the one signing their paychecks. Did she buy Delaney's? I thought she was just a waitress. No. Did you see the car? I heard the murmurs but kept my expression neutral as I walked through the restaurant like I had 1,000 times before. Only now, the energy around me had shifted. Respect, confusion, curiosity, even a little fear. Philip, the general manager, walked beside me, his clipboard clutched against his chest. Everyone's in the staff room. You ready? I nodded. Let's not keep them waiting. He led me past the kitchen, where chefs paused mid-prep to glance in my direction, and into the staff room where around a dozen employees sat waiting. Some were newer faces, others old friends. Jess, who I used to split tables with on Friday nights. Luis from back of house. Even Yvonne, the sharp-tongued hostess who once told me I was too smart to serve food. She raised an eyebrow as I stepped in. Philip cleared his throat. Thanks for coming in early, everyone. We have an important announcement this morning. As of last month, Delaney's changed ownership. A ripple of surprise went through the room. I kept my hands folded in front of me, the image of calm. Philip gestured to me. Please welcome your new majority owner and executive director, Rachel Morgan. Dead silence. Jess's eyes widened. Luis let out a low whistle. Yvonne's jaw literally dropped. I took a breath and stepped forward. Hi. I know this is unexpected. Some of you have known me as a server here. Some of you might only know my name from the roster. But for the past 2 years, I've been quietly working on building something bigger. I paused, letting the tension simmer. Through that work, I've acquired a controlling interest in this restaurant and 2 others in the metro area. Delaney's is the flagship, and starting today, we're making some changes. Another beat. We're increasing wages by 8% across the board. We're adding wellness stipends, and everyone here will now get quarterly bonuses based on performance and team success. Gasps and murmurs broke out. Jess put a hand over her mouth. But more than that, I continued, voice steady, I want this place to be what it always could have been. A restaurant that values people, not just profits. I've been on your side of the table. I know what it's like to pick up a shift on your birthday because rent's due. I know what it's like to smile while customers talk down to you. That ends here. Luis raised his hand slowly. So, you really own this place now? I smiled. I do, and I plan to make it better. Jess laughed softly. My mom is never going to believe this. She still thinks you're bussing tables. Yvonne stood slowly. So all those nights we thought you were just another burned-out grad school dropout. I was, I said honestly, but I also had a plan. Her gaze flicked toward Philip, then back to me. And now you're the boss. I'm still Rachel, but yes, I'm also the boss. It was surreal, standing there in a room where I used to blend into the background, and yet I wasn't angry. I wasn't there for revenge. Not exactly. But my family? They were going to find out. Soon. Because at 11 a.m., my mother had scheduled a client lunch. At Delaney's. In the private dining room. She had no idea. I turned to Philip. Let's make sure everything is perfect. I'll be sitting in on that lunch. He nodded, hiding a grin. Of course, boss. By 10:45 a.m., the room was set. Fresh linens, polished glassware. The menu customized with the client's name at the top. Carol Morgan PR had spared no expense. I stood just out of sight, behind the tinted glass partition as my mother breezed in wearing her signature power suit and heels that clicked with authority. She didn't notice me. Not yet. She was too busy barking instructions to the waiter, Marcus, who was clearly trying not to roll his eyes. Get my usual table, she snapped, and make sure no one disturbs us. 10 minutes later, her client arrived. A woman in a crisp navy blazer and expensive pearls. They exchanged fake smiles and air kisses. As they were seated, my mother leaned in close and whispered something. And just like that, I heard it again. She's just a waitress. My older daughter. Brilliant, but emotionally impulsive. Wasted at all waiting tables. Only this time I smiled. Because in less than 5 minutes, I was going to walk through that door, take the head seat at the table, and introduce myself not as her daughter, but as the new executive director of Delaney's. And I couldn't wait to see her face when she realized the waitress now owned the floor she was standing on. I watched them from behind the frosted glass, my mother all poise and performance, gesturing gracefully with her hands, a curated smile plastered on her face. She was in her element, charming a new client, flaunting her status, casually humiliating anyone who didn't match her version of success. "Rachel?" Philip whispered from behind me. "Are you sure you want to do this yourself?" I nodded. "It has to come from me." He gave a small, proud smile. "Then go knock them out." At exactly 11:07 a.m., I walked into the private dining room. The door slid open silently. My heels clicked against the polished floor. Deliberately so. My mother glanced up, ready to scold a server for interrupting. And then she froze. So did the client. I stepped forward calmly and extended a hand to the woman across from her. "Hello, I'm Rachel Morgan, Executive Director of Delaney's and majority shareholder in Morgan Hospitality Group. I just wanted to personally welcome you and thank you for dining with us." The client blinked in surprise, then stood to shake my hand. "Oh, well, it's an honor. I wasn't expecting—" My mother finally found her voice. "Rachel? What? What are you doing here?" "Running the restaurant," I replied simply. "Didn't Philip tell you? Delaney's changed ownership. I oversee all operations now." There was no anger in my tone, just professionalism. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. Her face paled, the fake smile dissolving under the weight of reality. The client turned to her. "This is your daughter? You didn't mention she owned the restaurant." My mother laughed weakly. "Oh, well, Rachel's had many ventures. I wasn't aware she owned this one." I raised an eyebrow. "You weren't aware because you never asked." There was silence. A heavy, pregnant pause where everyone seemed to breathe in the shift of power. I gestured toward the menus. "Please enjoy your lunch. The chef has prepared a few specials for you, and everything today is on the house." The client smiled, impressed. "Thank you, Ms. Morgan. That's very generous of you." "You're welcome. If you need anything, I'll be just outside." I turned and left the room without looking back, but I didn't need to. I could feel the tension simmering behind me like a pot ready to boil over. Back in the hallway, Philip handed me a fresh espresso. "You good?" "Better than good," I said, taking a sip. I think she's finally speechless. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because that evening I received a text from Vanessa. "Dinner at Mom and Dad's, 6:30. Apparently there's something we all need to discuss." I almost ignored it. But something in me, a flicker of the old Rachel who still craved acknowledgement, told me to go. At 6:25, I pulled into the driveway in the Rolls-Royce again. A different car than the one I'd rented that morning. This one? I'd bought it. With cash. The sun was beginning to set, casting long golden streaks over the familiar suburban lawn. The house looked exactly the same as it always had. White shutters, blue hydrangeas, and that perfect red front door that used to feel like a welcome sign. Now, it just looked like a stage. Inside, everyone was already gathered. Vanessa sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. My father stood near the fireplace, drink in hand. And my mother? She was pacing. She stopped when she saw me. "You could have given us a heads up," she said flatly. "Would it have made a difference?" I asked, setting my keys down calmly. "You embarrassed me," she snapped. "In front of a major client." "No," I corrected. "You embarrassed yourself by lying about who I was. I just told the truth." My father raised his hand. Let's not fight. Carol, sit down. She did, reluctantly. Vanessa finally looked up. So, you really own Delaney's now? I do, and 2 more locations. And we're opening a 4th next spring. My mother snorted softly. With what money? With the money I made from my blog, private consulting, and a few smart partners who believed in me before my own family did. Silence. Then my father asked quietly, "Why didn't you tell us?" I shrugged. You never listened. Why would this have been different? My mother's lip curled. So what is this? Revenge? Prove us wrong theater? No, I said, standing straighter. This is me living the life I built without your approval. But today made one thing clear. Your opinion doesn't define me anymore. Vanessa nodded slowly. I mean, respect. It was the closest thing to praise I'd ever heard from her. My father cleared his throat. Well, congratulations, Rachel. That's quite an achievement. I didn't reply, because the truth was, I didn't need their validation anymore. I stood there in the living room of the people who used to belittle me, now watching them squirm in the shadow of their own assumptions. And for the first time, I wasn't angry. I was free. 2 days passed before I heard from my mother again. A single text. Are you free for coffee? Just us. I stared at the message for a long time, unsure if it was an olive branch or a trap. We hadn't had a real one-on-one conversation in over a year. Even when Grandma Joan passed, my mother was all logistics. Funeral arrangements, seating charts, menu selections. Not grief, not connection. Still, something told me to go. We met at a sleek little cafe downtown, the kind she always preferred. All white marble and glass, expensive but minimal. I arrived first. She came in 3 minutes late, as usual, and sat across from me without a word. Her coffee order was complicated, of course. Mine was black. The silence between us felt heavier than it used to. She took a sip, placed the cup down carefully, and finally spoke. You didn't just buy a restaurant, she said quietly. You built an empire. I said nothing. I looked up the blog, she continued. Didn't even know you wrote. You never asked. A long pause. I suppose I didn't. She looked older than I remembered. Not physically, but in her eyes. Like something inside her was starting to fray at the edges. She glanced at me again, hesitant now. Vulnerable in a way I had never seen. Why didn't you tell me, Rachel? About any of it? I tried, I said. 12 times. You'd cut me off, change the subject. Compare me to Vanessa. It became easier not to try. She exhaled slowly and stared into her cup. I was trying to protect you. From what? From failure, she said, finally meeting my gaze. From embarrassment. From throwing your life away chasing ideas that didn't make sense to us. Didn't make sense to you, I corrected, but they made sense to me. I know that now. Another pause. This time I let it sit. Let her feel the discomfort I had carried for years. She glanced out the window, then said, Your grandmother would be proud. That hit harder than I expected. She was the only one who never doubted me, I said, my voice quiet. She believed in things we didn't understand, my mother admitted, and now I wish I'd listened to her more. There it was. Not quite an apology, but something close. She stirred her coffee again, slowly. Your father and we didn't know how to support something we couldn't control. We raised you to follow a plan. When you deviated from it, we panicked. And judged. Yes, she said to her credit. And judged. We sat in silence for a while, the hum of the cafe surrounding us like static. Then she asked something unexpected. Would you ever consider consulting for my agency? I blinked. What? PR is changing. Digital strategy, storytelling. Your skills could help us. And frankly, I'd rather bring you in than hire another overpriced agency that doesn't get it. It wasn't just a peace offering. It was respect, finally verbalized. I considered it. Let me think about it. She nodded. Of course. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. She placed it on the table, sliding it toward me. What's this? I found it in Joan's things after she passed. She said it was meant for you. I opened it slowly. Inside was a delicate gold necklace. A locket. I recognized it immediately. She used to wear it every Sunday. I clicked it open. Inside was a tiny photo of me at 5 years old and a folded slip of paper. I unfolded it carefully. In Grandma Joan's handwriting were the words, "Never forget what you're capable of, even when they do." Tears welled before I could stop them. I closed the locket and held it tight in my palm. She always saw you, my mother whispered, even when we didn't. I nodded. She left me the house, I said quietly. In her will. I know. I plan to keep it, restore it, maybe turn it into a creative retreat for young women starting over. She smiled a little. That sounds like something she would have loved. We sat there in silence, the air a little less tense, the space between us a little less jagged. Maybe this wasn't about winning anymore. Maybe it never was. It was about choosing to become more. Not to prove others wrong, but to prove yourself right. 2 weeks later, Vanessa got married. A lavish affair at a vineyard just outside the city. Think chandeliers hanging from trees, violin quartets playing pop music, and centerpieces so large you could barely see across the table. My mother had started referring to it as the event of the season in her group chats. I had kept my distance during the planning, not out of resentment, but because I had stopped asking to be involved in things I wasn't really welcome to participate in. Until I received the invitation. Hand-delivered, formal, embossed in gold foil. Inside was a handwritten note from Vanessa. I know we've been distant, but I want you there. You matter, even when I don't say it. Love. V. Dot. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. But it was real. So I went. And this time I didn't walk in unnoticed. I pulled up in my own Rolls-Royce, no longer rented, but purchased the week prior after closing a multi-year consulting contract with a restaurant investment group out of Chicago. They'd discovered me through my blog and were interested in buying into my brand. The first meeting was only supposed to be 30 minutes. It lasted 5 hours. The contract they offered changed my life. Again. As I stepped out of the car, dressed in a navy silk gown and classic heels, people turned. Whispers started, polite but curious. Is that her? Rachel Morgan? I hadn't been to a family function in years that didn't involve hushed judgments behind glassware. This time was different. Philip, my manager, had arranged for a small team to assist with catering oversight, one of the side businesses I'd recently acquired. He greeted me at the valet with a nod and a grin. Everything's running smooth, boss. Thanks, I said. And make sure the bride's cake gets staged early. Vanessa's been nervous about the photos. He gave me a mock salute and disappeared into the crowd. The ceremony was beautiful. Vanessa looked radiant, and I genuinely meant it. As I watched her walk down the aisle, I didn't feel envy or anger. I felt peace. She had followed the path laid out for her, and it fit her. I had forged my own, and it fit me. At the reception, I found my seat at one of the central tables, not off in the corner like past events, not buried in the overflow section behind the gift table. My place card sat directly across from my father. He raised a glass slightly in greeting. Glad you came. Wouldn't miss it. My mother hovered nearby, busying herself with introductions and social pleasantries. But occasionally I caught her watching me, not in judgment. Not even in comparison. Just watching. Halfway through dinner, a family friend leaned across the table. Carol tells us you own that restaurant downtown now. Delaney's, is it? I nodded politely. Yes, and a few others. We're expanding next year. How wonderful. Your parents must be so proud. My father actually smiled at that. We are. And for the first time, I believed he meant it. Later that night, Vanessa pulled me aside. We stood under a tree strung with fairy lights, the vineyard glowing around us like something out of a dream. Hey, she said. Thanks for being here. You didn't have to invite me, I replied. But I'm glad you did. She looked down at her bouquet, then back at me. I heard what Mom said at the engagement party. That caught me off guard. You did? She didn't know I was nearby. I never knew it got that bad between you and them. I'm sorry. Not your fault, I said. But I didn't stop it either, she admitted. I let them talk about you like you were lost, and I should have known better. I do know better. I nodded. You're here now. That matters more. She laughed softly. I told Daniel, the first person I was afraid to introduce to you, that my sister could outnegotiate his entire boardroom if she wanted. I laughed too. Let's hope I never have to. Then she grew serious. I admire you, Rach. I always have. Even when you scared the hell out of me with your choices. Thanks, I said, the words catching a little in my throat. That means more than you know. The music swelled behind us. The DJ had switched to something upbeat, and the dance floor beckoned. You coming? She asked. Yeah, I said. I'm ready. We walked back toward the crowd together, two sisters finally standing on even ground, not because we had chosen the same path, but because we had finally chosen to respect each other's. 3 months later, I stood on the porch of Grandma Jones' old house. The ivy had started creeping up the columns again, and the shutters needed repainting. But the porch swing still creaked the same way it had when I was 10 years old, legs too short to reach the floor, listening to Grandma talk about resilience like it was a muscle you could train. It was the first weekend of renovations. The house was mine now, officially transferred, keys in hand, plans drawn. I was turning it into what I always dreamed it could be, a creative retreat for women starting over. Women who had been dismissed, silenced, underestimated, just like I had been. The contractors were arriving the next day, but I wanted to spend one night here first, alone, to feel the energy of the place, to say goodbye to the old ghosts and hello to something new. I wandered through the rooms, fingers trailing along faded wallpaper. The dining table was still there, the one where Grandma taught me to balance a checkbook and where I once cried over a failed exam she told me didn't define me. It felt right to begin again here. As the sun dipped below the hills, casting golden light across the hardwood floor, I heard a car pull into the driveway. It was my father. I met him at the front door. Thought I'd find you here, he said, holding a paper bag that smelled faintly of takeout. I figured you'd call first. He shrugged. Wanted to surprise you. Brought your favorite, Thai, from that little place you used to beg us to try. I stepped aside, letting him in. We ate at the old table, the same chairs still creaking beneath us. There wasn't much small talk, just quiet chewing and the occasional shared glance. But when the food was gone and the silence lingered, he finally spoke. You were always meant for more. I looked up. That's not what you used to say. I know, he admitted. And I was wrong. I thought more meant titles and corner offices. I didn't understand that it could mean freedom, or vision, or building something from the ground up. I let that settle. Then I asked, why now? He sighed. Because I've been thinking. About the way we raised you. About all the moments we dismissed what didn't look familiar. We thought success had one shape. You proved it doesn't. I swallowed hard, surprised by the emotion rising in my chest. I was proud of Vanessa because she followed the path I knew. But I'm proud of you because you didn't. And still made it. There it was. The thing I had wanted to hear since the first time I waited a table and felt like less because of it. I smiled. Thank you. We sat in silence again. But this time it was warm. He glanced around. So this place, you're really going to turn it into a retreat? Yeah, for women who need a reset, who've been talked down to, or pushed out, or made to feel small. Your mother told me. She said it's the most meaningful thing you've ever done. I raised an eyebrow. She said that? He chuckled. She did. She's changing too. Slowly. It's hard for her, being wrong. I nodded. It was hard for me too, but healing starts somewhere. He stood and walked to the living room, picking up a photo of Grandma Joan from the mantel. She'd be proud. She always was, I whispered. Later that night, after he left, I walked outside and stood barefoot on the grass. The moon hung low and the air was heavy with the scent of lilacs. I looked up at the house, peeling paint and all, and felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. I no longer needed anyone to clap for me. I no longer craved validation in rooms where I was once laughed at. I had become the woman my younger self needed. Not perfect, but whole. And when I stood in front of those women one day, those future guests of this retreat, I would tell them, you are not just a waitress, or a secretary, or a divorcee, or a single mom, or a woman starting over. You are more than the labels they gave you. And your path is not just valid, it's powerful, just like mine.